Welcome back to Business Week and Horizon News. Well, in a move to further liberalize the foreign exchange market, Nigeria's central bank governor has lifted exchange rate restrictions for international money transfer operators. The restriction was previously announced in September and had mandated IMTOs to quote rates with an allowable limit of minus 2.5% to plus 2.5% around the previous day's closing rate of the NAFEM market. Under the latest regulation, money transfer operators are now granted the flexibility to quote exchange rates for Naira payout to beneficiaries based on the prevailing market rates. The CBN also prohibited banks from operating IMTO services, while fintech companies are not allowed to obtain approval for money transfer operations. Earlier in the week as well, the bank had sent a circular stating that banks whose current net open positions, NOPs, exceeded 20% short and 0% long had to bring them within the prudential limit by Thursday, February 1. It also directed banks to maintain adequate stocks of high-quality liquid foreign assets such as cash and government securities in each significant currency. Well, I'm joined again by Kelvin. I also have Oluwatoyin Aina and Professor Joe Ezigbo, who will be talking about the energy sector in a bit. But first, Kelvin, there's been a slew of policies, circulars out this week on Nigeria's exchange rate. What does this all point to in your mind?
I think these are important structural changes, even if the $30.4 billion they got from Afrexim and the syndicates of lenders is a drop in the ocean, considering the fact that you have outstanding forwards. On Monday they came out with a circular on all-in rates and the second check that banks do, which ties into the circular they came on Wednesday with net open positions for long, which is a good move. If the CBN follows through, banks will be forced to liquidate their open positions, which their rumors is somewhere around $5 billion long. That will also end speculation between the all-in rates and the second check. Also, the move on using USD as a collateral to get Naira loans, CBN has banned it, and they are following through with the circular that came out. They also want banks to shore up their offshore positions with their correspondent banks so that they can maintain adequate and healthy clean lines for their USD obligations. But then again, when you go to the nitty-gritty of it, you look at Project Gazelle and the fact that the government is taking 164.25 million barrels of crude oil, for how much? For $30.4 billion, $65 forward sale strike price, and at 90,000 barrels per day. And you look at the fact that when you see the average out of the PSC and JV, NNPC gets anywhere around 510,000 barrels of crude oil on a daily basis. And it already has in FSAs pledged 425,000 barrels of crude oil. So it goes back to the conversation that we're going to be having today on the midstream and downstream sector. How do you meet up with your equity contribution in your 20% shares to Dangote for 300,000 barrels of crude oil per day until $1.7 billion in equity is paid? It goes back to the fact that it doesn't make sense for you to import crude oil when you're a major producer. Dwarfing.
I mean, we'll talk about the dynamics in downstream, but I wanted to ask you, with all these policies and regulations, are we going to get to eventual price discovery for the Naira? And are we going to get to a point where we see that stability in the exchange rate based on these policies?
I think there are two major drivers. Number one, the energy basket, in my estimate, is worth anywhere around $85 million per day. And, if you have full backward integration for that 9 different products that forms the energy basket, you take $2.4 billion of pressure from the market on a monthly basis. Yeah. Hopefully by this February, production will start, but capacity utilization will remain under 50%. And then there is a food side of it, inflation that will, because inflation sets the tone for interest rate and exchange rate, right? So these structural changes that the CBN is making is good, is a foundation, but they still need liquidity in the market to sort out the forwards. There are still about $4.2 billion in commercial letters of credit, capital and dividend remittances, and from payout that is outstanding with the banks. Yeah. The NDF, the non-deliverable forwards market that the CBN has, is not functioning because there's no liquidity in it. Any exchange-based trade derivatives you're creating at FMDQ is not going to function because there's no liquidity in it. Liquidity is what is going to back the structure you set up. So at the end of the day, it comes back to one question: do you have FX liquidity to solve the demand?
Yeah, indeed. And of course, FX liquidity is not just this economic concept. It's something that energy operators and producers obviously need to run their operations. And I'm so glad to be joined in the studio today by Professor Joe Ezigbo, who is the co-founder and managing director of Falcon Corporation, a major gas operator, distributor, and supplier, Downstream. And also, we call her the energy woman, Oluwatoyin Aina, group head of energy for the Downstream space at First Bank. So I'm going to ask, maybe I'll start with you, Toyin. Given the current macroeconomic outlook, the dynamics we see, you heard Kelvin talk about some of the challenges with FX liquidity. How has your segment of the energy sector fared, given all these liquidity challenges?
Okay, so the downstream sector has actually gone through a lot of changes, especially with the liquidity crisis, FX paucity, international energy prices, geopolitics. You know, the market is quite dynamic and there are lots of factors that affect it. So I would say that in terms of the depth of the market is actually getting better, and with competition coming in, we are expecting that the market forces of demand. And
where's the competition coming from?
So competition is actually going to come largely even from Dangote refineries, especially for the international suppliers. So before now, almost 100% of local consumption of petroleum products is being imported, right? And who are the drivers of the import is basically the international suppliers, the likes of British Petroleum, Shell, Trafigura, Vitol, you know, the Glencore. Now that Dangote is going to come on stream, is going to probably, not probably, definitely reduce the share of wallet that those international suppliers would have. So it's good for the country because we expect that it will drive efficiency in country. And of course, with the deregulation that is supposed to have happened, we expect also that it's going to streamline the industry. So it's going to be the stronger players that would survive, because in a fully deregulated environment, the forces of demand and supply would determine price. So everyone that had been initially been buffered by subsidy or support from government, their inefficiencies will become more visible. So you're going to see that it's going to be the players that are efficient, that have their supply chain, you know, clearly defined, that have their product sourcing right, and their distribution channels intact. They are the ones that would emerge as the winners. In recent years, we've seen a bit of mergers and acquisitions within the industry. We're probably going to see a lot more acquisitions by the stronger players. So it's going to cause the industry to become much more effective. So in general, I think it's going to be good news going forward. Now it seems a bit tough because of FX paucity predominantly. But I think by the time everyone is operating as effective as they ought to, the market is going to become deeper and we get more foreign direct investment into the country. Thank you.
Great stuff. I like the positive tone and outlook. Then I'll come back and tease more around some of the dynamics of operators in the sector. Professor Joe Ezigbo, recently, I know Falcon Corporation actually did a deal with the the Chapel Hill Managed Infrastructure Debt Fund to build an LPG facility. And I want to know, you know, we often talk about oil and petroleum products, but LPG, which is something that a lot of households, end users use and are trying to switch to, because it's a cleaner form of cooking gas than, say, kerosene and whatnot, how is the current economic environment impacting downstream gas supply and distribution and your ability to build and operate infrastructure?
Thank you so much. It's something that I worry about every day. I think about it. Currently, as we speak at the moment, the effect of FX, you look at what is available to the common man for the purchasing power. You look at, there's so many things buffet the downstream gas industry. But so let's take a look at this foreign FX issue. I'm building a tank farm at this point in time, and by the grace, I would just say by the grace of God, we woke up one morning and my wife and I, we said to ourselves, if we continue to wait, because we're getting money from our NIDF, but they give it to us in tranches, they pay to us as we need it. So when we finish using a segment, we apply again and they give it. But we have a bulk approval. So we went to them and said, look, the way things are going at the moment, we cannot continue like this because our top, we pegged it, what's considered in our economics at 500 naira
to the dollar. Oh, wow.
So when he left 300, we were approaching 400, we said, no, we can't just wait. Because most industries that are building have all stopped. Most of them, they cannot continue. So we went back to Aina and said, please, can you give us some money in bulk? Let's buy dollars. And we don't want to keep it in our bank. Warehouse it in FCMB, which is your bank. Fortunately, after a long struggle, they agreed. So we bought dollars and warehoused it there. That is why today we're still constructing.
Right.
Minus that would have closed
So
shop.
you had to take a timely business decision to hedge against the risk of further devaluation. Yeah.
So now our long lead items, we are continuing, no issues. However, we're supplying gas to customers. And you see, for us at Falcon, gas business is a service delivery first and foremost, then secondly, for profit. So we take a look at our customers belong to the environment. So they are the biggest pillar of our business because if they're not there, you can get the gas and nobody will buy it from you. So we think about them, we discuss with them on a regular basis. Because at this point in time, if you go to some of them, they have warehouses filled up with goods because nobody's buying. Because the man in the street doesn't have the economic power to buy them. Yeah. Not anymore. It used to be better, but it's gone that bad. So they have to buy it. Then to make things a bit worse, we build them with the dollar, not naira. They sell in naira. We pay in naira, but we build them in dollars.
Okay.
So you see, the change is so dramatic, so that they are now where they were paying 500 naira for each dollar we charge them. It's gone up to 1,300.
Yeah, and is that because your equipment, some of the parts that you need to do your construction and build your operations you're being sourcing them from overseas?
Beautiful. That is the main thing. However, having said that, that's why I thought that the federal government, central bank, should have come to our aid, realizing the importance of this sector in the welfare of the common man on the streets. Yeah. That we back up the people who produce these things for the masses to consume. And as long as the masses cannot consume them, as long as we keep on, today somebody will pay 100 million naira for a specific amount of gas, the next month he's paying times one, just multiple times three.
Yeah.
He's paying 300 million.
I mean, this problems are very well outlined by yourself. And I'm wondering, Tony, is given the strategic nature of the energy sector to Nigeria's economic fortunes, let's face it, and I know we're talking about liberalization of the FX market, but are there certain types of structures or concessions that can be made for really critical industries like gas or that drive industrialization around access and availability of FX liquidity? What are your thoughts on those sorts of things?
Well, interesting question. So the oil and gas industry, like you said, is very critical to the nation. And one would expect that as a result of that, there might be special concessions in terms of FX availability. But that is not necessarily what we see. I guess because the Apex Bank wants the market liberalized.
Yes.
By the time you come across as favoring one sector over the other, it fundamentally flaws the concept of liberalization.
Of course. Yeah.
So the idea is that the exchange rate should be driven by the market. So demand, supply driven. So
and what are the pain points of your operators, in terms of the downstream sector? Now we've moved to liberalization. What are still some of the bottlenecks that people see, maybe beyond just FX or access to credit?
So FX is a major one, really, if you ask me. And what has happened is that a lot of the traders or marketers are having to be, come up with creative solutions. So what they try to do is to purchase all of their FX upfront so that they can peg the cost, the absolute cost. Because given the level of volatility of the exchange rate, if you're not careful, you could actually incur serious losses.
Yes.
At the point of booking a cargo till when the cargo gets delivered until when you distribute to the end users, a lot can happen. So what we see in the market is that people actually they go into various FX derivative solutions. They lock into forwards. They buy spots upfront for the full value of the cargo. And so liquidity, in terms of funding is not too much of a challenge, at least for those that have become credit checked and have structured their enterprises with very good corporate governance and credit discipline. So the Naira is available, which is what we do, to fund the marketers to purchase the FX upfront and ensure that they hedge their FX risk. And we also have products internally also that we can use, NDFs, forwards. Yes, and forwards is not just necessarily from CBN. We see a situation where a lot of the importers are being matched with exporters that have NXPs.
Of course.
And those owners of NXPs tend to sell their FX forward to support the market. So we've seen quite a bit of that happening. So I think funding is not necessarily a problem. It's more of the exchange rate and sourcing of the FX. So it's a FX supply issue that most of the marketers tend to face, which is where there's a lot that needs to be done, to ensure that there's more FX. And I think, yes, while we know that oil and gas is the major FX sourcing for the economy, I think we should begin to look at, expanding into other adjacencies, like, export of cash crops.
Yeah, non-oil exports.
Non-oil exports,
yeah,
and which already we see a few of the marketers diversifying into non-oil export to support.
Oh, so downstream oil marketers are diversifying
into
their business models.
We've seen quite a bit of them going into various sorts of non-oil exports, from cashew to sesame to all the very, very globally traded soft commodities. Yes, as ancillary to their business. So we've seen quite a bit of that happening.
Professor Ezigbo, you wanted to come in on that?
Yes. You see, the government and CBN, some of their policies have been very forward-looking, because they say for any infrastructure you're building, like in LPG, there are funds they have available, so they peg them at 8, 9, 10%, and I give it to you.
In terms of the interest rate?
Yes, okay. Beautifully crafted, the policy is perfect. Then come to implementation. That's where the issue is. It's not the policy, it's the implementation. The human factor comes in and makes it impossible for those that need it to access these funds. So you do everything, you put in all the applications, and it is pigeonholed somewhere, where to be creative to be able to access them. And then the moment, and they say, become a Nigerian. The moment you become that Nigerian, which is terrible, I think is horrible for anybody to say, this is Nigerian attitude, this is Nigerian way of life, this is like way of behavior. It doesn't exist. We have, what is good anywhere in the world. What is evil in the entire world. But however, for us, because we've stopped thinking, I think poverty dulls your senses of goodness, dulls your sense of good behavior. And then you think that is an excuse for you to do anything. So what has been briefly articulated by government to help us
should be implemented.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not implemented.
Yeah, and indeed, Kelvin, I want to bring you in here now. You've heard a lot of, I guess, the pain points in a sense. Downstream oil, from a banker's perspective, financing the downstream oil sector, and a gas supplier distributor who also builds infrastructure, some of the FX liquidity challenges, the cash crunch, the policy bottlenecks. What are your thoughts on looking beyond macroeconomics now to real operations, business, private sector? What are your thoughts on what the priority policy for the government should be insofar as access to liquidity and foreign currency should be? Or should these companies just essentially localize their supply chains entirely and we go indigenous, completely, so we don't have to rely on needing to source FX for our operations? What are your thoughts?
I don't think we'll get to the point anytime soon where we don't have to rely on, because, for example, I'll pick one major example. Nigeria doesn't produce its own steel. Take AKK as an example, 614 kilometers, Ajaokuta, Abuja, Kaduna, and then Kano. And then there's a leg that's supposed to go from Kano to Gosu in Zamfara. I don't know what the plan is for that. But then I was looking at some documents on AKK, and I was just thinking to myself, you can imagine the EPC, engineering, procurement, and construction for the FID that was designed for the project. You can imagine that, like Professor Ezigbo has said, NIDF releasing funds to them in tranches, that they were also structured in the same way, and they were releasing funds to them in tranches, and they have to purchase steel. And steel is a major, carbon steel is actually what they use for gas pipelines, high pressure gas transmission pipes. You can imagine they have to import steel from India or from China or wherever, or from Russia, or wherever else in the world, in tranches, and the exchange rate keeps moving. How do you hedge against that? And steel is a major foundation for heavy duty manufacturing in any economy. Nigeria doesn't produce its own steel. NYOMCO is not functioning. Nigerian government has an obsession with controlling the steel sector, and I don't understand why. So if you look at the supply chain, you ask yourself, what are we producing now? What are we going to be producing in 5 years or in 10 years? How can we backwardly integrate? She was talking about cash crops, and it's interesting because even for me, for minor cash crops, the solution is not to export cash crops in their raw state. The solution is to process it into product like enterprise goods before you export, because they give you more. The Chinese buy a metric ton of soybean from Nigeria at $12,000 per container. Per metric ton. That's what they buy soybeans from Nigeria. You can imagine what you will get if you process 1 metric ton of soybean into soybean cake and soybean oil. So we need to look at the supply chain and look at backward integration, but it's not a 6 months or 12 months play. And unfortunately, there are no overnight solutions to the FX crisis we have in Nigeria today.
Okay. No overnight solutions. Just a quick word from you, Tony, on sort of your positive outlook for the industry. I mean, the bright spots, just one thing that you see on the horizon in the downstream energy sector that excites you, despite a lot of the doom and gloom that we sometimes portray. Very briefly.
Okay, so I guess I'll just go back again to the Dangote refineries. So the fact that we have the largest single train refinery in country, 650,000 barrels per day, for Nigeria, in Nigeria, and planning to feed the globe, for me is exciting. So it helps with job creation. It helps with retention of foreign currency capital. Of course, that's after backing out the cost of feedstock. And if we can ensure that he buys locally rather than importing, all of the effects would stay in country. So for me, I'm excited about that, and hopefully that would help to cushion the supply pressures on foreign currency. And we have more GDP contribution from the industry than we have now.
Thank you very much. Of course, buying locally is key because already the refinery is importing from the US. But story for another day. Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for on the show today. I'd like to thank Professor Joe Ezigbo, Oluwatoyin Aina, and of course, Kelvin Emmanuel, our regular energy economist here, for talking to us about FX, the Nigerian economy, and the downstream energy outlook. Let's continue the conversation online so we can talk about the issues pertaining to economic stability in Nigeria. Do have a lovely weekend ahead. I'm Rolake Akinkubefelani. Bye for now.